support, but in the fullness of time, you think you got it wrong. I love this on the text. I was mainly thinking about political things like the Vietnam War, but this is great. From Anonymous, my husband installed a bidet in our bathroom, and I was angry, saying I'd never use it. But I love it now. So whether it's a bidet or the Vietnam War, what was the thing you supported or opposed some time ago, but now agree that you got it wrong? 1300 222 702 is the number. And all these, the use of subtitles in English language films and TV. Terry in Portland said, I recently watched The Irishman on Netflix between De Niro, Pacino and Pesci. Method acting, mumbling, couldn't understand a word of dialogue. I needed to put on the subtitles just to work out what was happening. 1300 222 702. On the text, 0467 922 702. Some news headlines. Adam Story, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Richard. The federal government will provide an extra $424 million to try to address Indigenous disadvantage. The funding will be used to improve drinking water supplies in remote communities and provide more housing and further support for women and children experiencing domestic violence. Friends and patients of the controversial neurosurgeon Dr. Charlie Teo have gathered to show him support on the first day of a hearing at the New South Wales Medical Council. Dr. Teo is defending himself against complaints lodged by two former patients with the Healthcare Complaints Commission. More than 33,000 people are now confirmed to have died in the earthquakes that struck Turkey and Syria. Rescuers are still trying to find more survivors nearly a week after the disaster. More than 50,000 homes have lost power and more towns are being evacuated along New Zealand's North Island as Cyclone Gabrielle approaches. It's forecast to move closer to the east coast over the next 24 hours. More news at 5.
Breakfast.
The Queen Victoria building will be renamed in the lead up to World Pride.
With James Valentine.
Well, the QVB is obviously such an iconic Sydney building, so it's sending this message of acceptance, celebration and inclusion.
And is there anything else like this? A building's being lit up?
The entire city will be one giant rainbow during Sydney World Pride, James.
Weekdays from 5:30.
You won't be able to turn your head and not see a rainbow.
ABC Radio Sydney.
Richard Glover with you on Drive. Why do you use subtitles? For kids' shows, e.g. preschools, seeing the words will surely enhance their language skills. So there's an idea. I don't know. Do they learn better if you have the words on as well? I've been using subtitles, says one of our texters, since I had my kids 20 years ago, so I could watch my shows while they were asleep at night and not wake them up. So maybe once you've started the habit, it's hard to break it. Things that you've changed your mind on. Mr. Dutton says he's changed his mind on the apology. 15 years ago, he boycotted Parliament during that important thing. He now accepts that was the wrong thing to do. When did you? What did you get wrong? Do you think, as he's admitted to getting this wrong? One of our texters says, Mark Latham. What was I thinking? It is 22 minutes to 5 here on ABC Radio Sydney. Down to Canberra.
Members on my right.
Well, hang on.
Members on my left.
I will not be lectured about sexism.
You sit down, Buffett.
Order. Mr. Speaker. Google it, mate.
How pathetic.
What sort of person does that?
Order, Buffett.
And Brett Worthington, our ABC political reporter, joins us from Canberra. Good afternoon.
Hello, Richard.
Yeah, as we've just been discussing, Peter Dutton expressed his regret for boycotting the 2008 national apology in Parliament. I know there's a lot of listeners are saying, "Oh, look, that's a fake apology. Don't believe him, Richard." I think it sounded to my ears as if it was sincere.
We've heard him make references to it a couple of times, and I think that if we expect that people will not evolve at any point in their lives, then it makes your ability to win ideas and political debates fairly limited, isn't it? If everyone was stuck where they were 15 years ago, Peter Dutton, we can only take him, at his own words when he was saying it was right for Prime Minister Rudd to make that apology in 2008, and it's right that we recognise the apology today. It's right that the government continues efforts in this way.
I suppose the reason for people's cynicism, I guess, is that they're contrasting this to what they regard anyway as his divisive tactics over the voice.
But I think that to some extent, Peter Dutton would argue that you can both say that you regret what you did back then when the apology happened. He would also argue that the Liberal and national politicians believe in recognition, but they do not believe in the voice, where they do feel that there's not enough details and it goes too far. So you could see how you can have an argument that is complicated and a bit messy, and where it is different for Peter Dutton is that he has built a political reputation on being somewhat of a blunt instrument in how he's gone about carrying out his political debates. Now, he's having to find nuance here because you're not hearing Peter Dutton or many in his Liberal ranks saying they don't support any level of recognition. It is the voice that they're getting caught up on and focused on. But at the same time, I think that in politics you need to allow, in our reporting at least, you need to allow people space to move and argue a different position than they might have 4 days ago. Because how am I to know if it's genuinely not the case?
Well, let's listen into him, and everyone can obviously make their own mind up about it. Here he is expressing his regret.
In 2008, I'd been out of the Queensland Police Force for about 9 years, turning up to domestic violence incidences where Indigenous women and children had suffered physical abuse, and the judgment that I formed was that if we were to make an apology, it needed to be at a time when we had addressed and we had curbed that violence and those incidences. I failed to grasp at the time the symbolic significance to the stolen generation of the apology. It was right for Prime Minister Rudd to make the apology.
Yeah, well, there you go. And so he went on for a little while. Brett Worthington is with us. What was the reaction in Parliament and among his colleagues on the other side?
So there's a few elements here. Linda Burney, who is the Indigenous Australian spokeswoman, has really kind of seized on Peter Dutton's comments and said, look at how you feel now about the debate that the response you had 15 years ago. Will in 15 years' time you suddenly have that same regret if you do not get in behind and vote now for recognition and in support of the voice, which is an interesting element that Linda Burney is essentially saying, we welcome you on this journey, Peter Dutton. I think what was interesting about this closing the gap is that we saw the report come out late last year. And now that report was fairly damning in that it showed there were only 4 targets that were on track and that 4 targets were going backwards. What we saw from the government today was they're going to do new implementation plan measures to work out how it is that you're not making inroads, given I think we're down to 8 years from when it was originally mapped out as to when the gap would be closed. Australia is not making inroads into reversing what we are seeing with life expectancy in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And so the new government is coming in and trying to put its stamp on it to work out what it can do to close that gap. We're seeing there's some new money. So there's $424 million. 150 of that will go to clean water in remote communities. There'll be about $111 million for housing in the NT, where you've seen chronic levels of overcrowding. And there'll be a bit of money as well to make food more affordable in isolated areas.
Let's hear a little bit from Linda Burney.
It's tempting to look back now and think of the apology as something that was inevitable, but it was not. And it took leadership in the Parliament and in the community to make it happen. The same is true of the voice. I know that some people who boycotted the historic day in 2008 have since expressed their regret. When a generous and gracious hand is outstretched, it is our responsibility to grasp it.
Yeah, nice, nicely put metaphor at the end from Linda Burney. Brett, from the other story today, Brett, from just got to find it. I'm finding the figure 19,000 refugees. That's right, who arrived in Australia by boat before 2013 will be able to apply for a resolution of status visa.
Yeah, so we're talking about people that are on temporary protection visas and safe haven visas. These are people who arrived before Operation Sovereign Borders came into force. And it's meant that you've had people essentially sitting there without having the status or the access to things like social services and Medicare, family reunion rights, a pathway to citizenship. These protection visas is something that Labor were very critical of in opposition and said that they would be looking to to abolish, and we saw that be announced late yesterday. So in doing this, the people that are on these will be able to take steps towards things like citizenship and family reunions. It has been interesting, though. This was always going to be one where you'd see very little agreement, if any, between the Coalition and Labor. That Labor sort of announced it last night without having the ministers come out and say it. We've only seen the Immigration Minister in question time take a question about it from the other side of politics where he spoke to it. It's something that Labor wanted to follow through on election commitment, but he's certainly not out there championing the decision that it's taken.
Let's hear from the Shadow Minister for Home Affairs, Karen Andrews. She said the measure could open the door for more people to come to Australia illegally.
They've opened the gate. This is the thin edge of the wedge. It's now permanency for people. For those that have arrived before 2013, the pressure will now be on. And I don't know that Labor's got the strength that it needs to be able to stand up to what's going to be coming their way. There should be absolutely no changes to Operation Sovereign Borders as it was under the Coalition government. And that would mean that people who came here would remain on temporary protection visas.
That's Karen Andrews from the opposition. Brett, the government might respond that a lot of the other elements, in fact, most of the elements of the previous government's system are still in place.
Yeah, so Labor is saying that essentially it fully supports Operation Sovereign Borders, and these were people who arrived before the implementation of it. And they're saying that if you do arrive by boat, you'll still be hit with the same rules where you won't be allowed to enter the country. You will either be sent back or you're sent to third country for processing. Labor is wanting to walk a line which says that it is absolutely sticking with the broader hardline immigration policies that you saw implemented under the Coalition, while looking to make this change for the 19,000 odd people who were already here under these temporary protection visas.
All right, let's hear a little bit of Bill Shorten outlining some of those views.
We don't intend to see the people smugglers model given any oxygen. It's a terrible way of coming to Australia. It's horribly unsafe. It's fatal and deadly. So the answer is no, no and no. The government is fully committed to Operation Sovereign Borders. And under it, we have returned or turned back every boat that's tried to enter Australia. The measure which is being proposed doesn't apply to any person who arrived since Operation Sovereign Borders.
Well, there goes. There's Bill Shorten on RN this morning. Brett Worthington is with us from Canberra. Just finally, the Parliament's Electoral Matters Committee has recommended the passing of a bill amending how referendums are held in Australia. How significant is this?
Well, it's interesting. It's kind of broken along party lines to some extent. They had the Coalition representatives on the committee as saying they really wanted a pamphlet with the full details of the yes and no campaign. Now, we know that Anthony Albanese said that will be happening, but to what extent will it be the kind of 2,000-word essay that might have happened in the past for yes and no campaigns? That detail is still getting thrashed out. Interesting, a couple of elements where donations will have to be declared above $15,000. I think it's $15,200. So there'll be greater transparency on who is putting money in to the large donations that we see for the campaigns going forward. And there will be greater efforts to ensure that there is this education that is happening in a modern way so that people who haven't obviously done a referendum in more than 2 decades have a clear understanding of what it is that is happening.
All right, let's hear a little bit from the committee chair, Kate Thwaites. She says more needs to be done to encourage referendum participation, particularly amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Conducting remote area mobile polling for up to 19 days ahead of the referendum date. Trialling the provision of secure telephone voting in certain circumstances. Providing for secure on-the-day enrolment for improved enfranchisement and participation, particularly amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Speaker, the current rate of enrolment amongst Indigenous Australians is around 82% nationally, and that is not good enough.
Yeah, well, there you go. From Kate Thwaites, bringing an end to Brett Worthington's day in politics. Brett, thanks so much.
Thanks, Richard.
Brett Worthington. Yeah, when have you changed your mind about something significant? We've given the example of Peter Dutton today on this event of 15 years ago, the apology. He says he got it wrong, boycotting it. What did you get wrong? Was it the Vietnam War? Were you one of those people? There were lots of them. In fact, we were talking to one of the historians of the war the other day, and he was saying, actually, people think it was unpopular from the beginning. Not true at all. Most Australians supported it until quite late, relatively late. And then we started collectively changing our minds. Were you one of those people who supported it at the beginning and then changed your mind? Were you one of those people who thought, it was all right for the Springboks to come and tour Australia? That's all. We should keep sport and politics apart, and then change your mind? Was it something like economics, like the floating of the dollar or the introduction of the GST, where you thought, that's a terrible idea, but changed your mind? What did you change your mind about? Was it a significant thing? This is from one of our texters. In 1988, I recall being annoyed about the Indigenous Survival Day march that followed the bicentennial Australia Day parade. In my defence, I was 16 and very, very ignorant. But to this day, I cringe at the memory and very much regret I wasn't better informed. See, I think it's great when people have that insight and can remember the feeling and understand that it was the same person but differently informed in a different stage of life, and embrace the ability to change. Another one saying, I voted for Mark Latham for PM. I was wrong about Lindy Chamberlain, says Jenny. I was so convinced she was guilty. That's so interesting, isn't it? Half the country were. And yet I think we all now understand, for me, that the moment was reading her book, actually, which is an extraordinary book, fantastically well written and so convincing. Once you read it, you just think, okay, this is this terrible, terrible miscarriage of justice. But yeah, a lot of Australians thought the opposite. But yeah, how good to understand that. Okay, we were wrong. I mean, we were. I mean, I never thought she was guilty, but I do understand that at the time people were affected by the fact that the forensic evidence looked so certain. So you just sort of, if they say that, it must be true. And if that's true, therefore, she must be guilty. But we were wrong. What about you? What have you changed? What have you changed your mind about? Can you remember thinking something where you now think, why did I think that? That's not what I think anymore. 1300 222 702. Jeff's here from North Sydney. Hi, Jeff.
Richard, how are you?
Yeah, good. What have you changed your mind about?
Back in the late 70s, I used to go to anti-nuclear protests because of the long-term damage that it potentially was going to do to the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, now with renewables and the setting up of the renewables and the fact that we need a baseload power, we need to get rid of coal, I'm actually for nuclear power now because the renewables aren't good for baseload.
Yep.
Nuclear can be better for baseload. And if you look around Europe, Ukraine changed things a lot for Europe and the gas, Germany and all that kind of stuff. Germany got rid of their coal, wanted to go renewables, but when they get into troubles and need extra power, they buy it from France. France has had nuclear for a very long time, and they seem to be doing it successfully.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
what changed your mind was essentially the fact that the things we were using instead, the coal and gas, suddenly it became apparent that they were more dangerous than we thought they were.
Yeah, well, in Australia, we're happy to dig it out of the ground or plug a hole in the ground and get the gas out. It's pretty easy, but other countries have done it more successfully. And the only times we've ever had any problems with nuclear, I think 3 Mile Island was lack of maintenance. Fukushima was putting it in totally the wrong spot, and they got caught out with a tsunami that made terrible damage. And Ukraine, I'm not sure, maybe that was lack of maintenance as well.
Well, I mean, you're not going to convince everybody, but the important thing for this discussion is you've changed your mind.
Thank you, Richard.
Which is interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Jeff from North Sydney, what have you changed your mind about? This is interesting. I changed my mind about gay marriage, was totally against it, says Sarah. Just because of my religious upbringing. It wasn't until I talked to some gay couples that I realised it was not a choice. It was part of their DNA. I'm now a big advocate of gay rights and gay marriage. So, yeah, Sarah changed her mind. Someone says I got my decisions to marry my 2 husbands wrong. You change your mind about that too. And I like this. Anyone who thinks the same at 50 as they did when they were 20 has wasted 30 years of their life. In other words, yeah, it is good to change, and it's good to admit your change. Now, whether you believe it in the case of Mr. Dutton, of course, is a political question for you. A lot of people are very cynical about that. Jeremy in Thirroul says the main issue is the timing. So many years have passed when he could have said something. Now it's a major news story. It's a little late for sincerity, in my opinion. I mean, of course, he claims he has apologised before. Yeah, sure. What else? Dubious Dutton's apologies ring hollow, as does his policy on just about everything. No credibility or integrity, but plenty of hypocrisy. That's from Bill in Armidale. So, there's two issues to talk about here, really. One, whether you believe him or not. But the other is whether it is possible to change your mind sincerely, whether he's done it or not. But is it possible to change your mind sincerely? And I think it's something to be celebrated. I think it's great when we look at the ideas we had 15 years ago and we think, no, okay, I've looked at that differently. I have new information. I've thought about it differently. Maybe I've matured a bit and I now think this. We were also talking about JB Hi-Fi. The finance report said that they had a pretty good year, although things were starting to slow in January. I talked about those gaudy signs they have and said it makes it look as if everything's a bargain, those handwritten signs. I mean, whether it is or not, I don't know. But this is from Maureen. Nice note. I work at JB. We have incredibly good poster sign writers that are extremely talented. Come out and see the young women that work at the store I work at, Narellan. I'm there Wednesday to Saturday. And by the way, I'm 69 years old and I love it. That's from Maureen. So I think JB's got a very young feel, doesn't he? You've got a lot of staff with the tats and all that sort of stuff and the handwritten signs, but Maureen loves the atmosphere there. This is on the text. I'm deeply ashamed of my previously held Christian belief that homosexuality was wrong. I can still barely type this with the shame and regret that I still feel. There you go. On the text, deeply ashamed of my previously held Christian belief that homosexuality was wrong. And it says, I've now dropped my faith because of it. Back in the 80s, my husband, this is from Jen, I scrimped and saved to send our 2 children to private schools. We now regret it. Fully support public school education. We regret how much funding is allocated to the privileged private schools. So sometimes big political things, sometimes very personal things that are also, well, in that case, political. Sue says, as a 16-year-old in my first job, I worked in a bank in Martin Place. Infuriated at an anti-Vietnam War march holding me up getting to Wynyard. How dare they? A few years later, I would have gladly joined them. That's from Sue. Isn't that funny? How dare they get in my way to Wynyard? Oh, okay. And then you think about it for a few years. Used to think punk rock was the only music worth listening to. Turns out there's some good stuff in other genres. I was young and dumb, says Duncan in Stanmore. What have you changed your mind about it? Paul and Dunningham says, I forget who said it, but the definition of an educated person is someone who is poised to change their mind on the basis of evidence. I thought the movie Contagion was far-fetched until the pandemic, says one of our texters. What else? I remember the ALP under the leadership of Arthur Calwell was always opposed to the Vietnam War. It was Menzies who lied to the public in Parliament about the request from the South Vietnamese that saw our troops eventually sent there under halt. Doesn't mean that it didn't have majority support, though, among the population until late in the piece. 1300 222 702. What's the thing that you changed your mind about? If you want to text 0467 922 702 here on Drive.
Available now on ABC Listen. Enjoy our library of great Aussie audiobooks all summer long, free to stream on the ABC Listen app, with a collection of fiction and non-fiction titles, including The Spare Room by Helen Garner.
She tossed her red wool shawl round her shoulders, raised her chin and sparkled at me, as if we were settling in at the Gin Palace for a martini and an hour's gossip.
A great range of ABC audiobooks, free to stream on the ABC Listen app.
Yeah, what did you change your mind about? A few more. I was a true homophobe back in my teens, and now I'm almost 60. Not completely changed my mind. I'm not gay, but I can understand gay marriage rights from now on. That's from Robert. Peter in Pyrmont says, I was once at 17 a solid socialist. Then I went to work and received my first pay slip, and they took out tax. They? Who are they? I became a not-so-socialist. That's from Peter in Pyrmont. The difference that the pay packet makes. Lee from Binder, I changed my mind about young people's hobbies like skateboarding, BMXs, being in the Olympics. Now, after deep thought, they're just as relevant as throwing a stick with a ribbon attached into the air while doing a forward roll. It's from Lee in Binder, who changed her mind. Did you change your mind? David, good afternoon.
G'day. I feel like I've changed my mind about everything. I'm only 35, but I grew up in a religious household, and I was anti-gay marriage and anti-abortion, and held those beliefs so truly and thought that they were, unshakable and believed them with my whole heart. And now I've done 100% 180 on all those things and have a completely different view. And it made me think about what else. That was a couple of years ago that I changed my views on that. And it made me think about what else do I hold dearly or assume that I'm going to backflip on in the future. And now I'm in the process of considering veganism and vegetarianism and whether it's right or wrong to eat animals. So it just makes me think about what other things in the future am I going to kind of backflip on that I hold as true today.
And is it a backflip or is it growth?
Yeah, 100%. I think I'm more humble now, and that acknowledge that something that I hold dear and true today may change tomorrow, and to eat a bit of humble pie and have a bit of humility in how I deal with others and argue my point.
Well, if we don't change, we're not growing, are we? Hey, David, thanks so much. And a few other texts about changing. I'm 73, says Meredith in Leichhardt, and believed we were right to go to war in Vietnam. 3 years ago, I went as a tourist to Vietnam. I was ashamed to be an Australian in Vietnam. We should never have gone to war there. So, yeah. Backflip or growth? Oysters, says a texter. I thought they were snot until my early 20s. Then she changed. 5 minutes to 5 is the time. Here on ABC Radio Sydney. And from ABC Sport, it is Tom Maddox. Good afternoon.
Hey, Richard, how are you?
Yeah, good. As we were discussing with Mr. Tommy Dean a little earlier, it was a real nail-biter in the Super Bowl.
It was 70-odd thousand fans, I think, Richard, crammed into the State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, to see a really entertaining Super Bowl. And it was thanks to a late field goal that the Kansas City Chiefs beat the Philadelphia Eagles 38 points to 35. It's their second title in 4 years, I think it is, so a bit of a dynasty brewing there, Richard. They trailed the Chiefs at the main break, but recovered and fought back, and they kicked that winning field goal with about 8 seconds left. There are a couple of Australians playing. Jordan Mailata, the ex-NRL player, and Aaron Sipos, the ex-AFL player. They were in the thick of it for the Eagles. Big Jordan Mailata was the offensive tackle, a lead blocker for the quarterback, Jalen Hurts, when he scored. And then the Chiefs came back, as I say, after half-time, and they were helped by this Super Bowl record 64-yard punt return against the Eagles. And sadly, it was off a pretty poor punt of just over 30 yards from Aaron Sipos. So I think he had a couple of punts for the game, and unfortunately, it might be that second punt that he might be remembered for some time. So a bit of disappointment for the Australians. Now 4 Australians have played in losing Super Bowls. And the Chiefs, they were really led by the league MVP, Pat Mahomes, who entered the game with an injury but recovered and won the MVP for another time.
But Jordan did stop anybody, except for, I think on one occasion, Tommy said, from laying any sort of hand on his quarterback, which is his role, isn't it?
Exactly. He blocks and and clears the space too. So yeah, he's been a cog for the Eagles all season.
And a pregnant Rihanna. If anyone's saying, I can't do anything, I can't do a big performance because I'm pregnant, forget it. She's done it.
I know, and what a way to do it. It was her first performance, I think, since 2016, and yeah, she had her first child some 9 months ago, and now she's announced to well over 100 million people that she's having another one. I think she rubbed her stomach. I don't know if you saw it within the first few minutes of that performance, and yeah, her team has confirmed she's expecting her second child. Now,
in men's cricket, after the defeat to India in the first Test, I guess the question is, can Australia turn it round for Test 2?
Yeah, I think there'll be some tough conversations to be had. Alan Border called that performance embarrassing. He says they need to toughen up. Of course, after Australia lost to India by an innings and 32 runs, there may well be a number of changes for the second Test starting on Friday in Delhi. Queensland spinner Matt Kuhneman's been flown in. He's never played a Test, but the selectors may opt to play 3 spinners. Mitchell Starc is pushing his case. Cameron Green is pushing his case. I think Josh Hazlewood's in the frame. Travis Head might be recalled after, of course, that outcry after he got dropped for the opening Test. So a lot of changes. And just quickly, the third Test has now been moved from Dharamsala to Indore. So it was deemed, the BCCI deemed Dharamsala not fit for play. I think at the outfield, there's not enough grass out there, Richard.
All right. Now, in the women's cricket, the Aussies are dominating.
Yeah, it couldn't be further from the men's story. There's, that they're trying to patch up holes in their side and the women don't seem to have any weaknesses. There was a really big statement in South Africa. It's the T20 World Cup over there. And in the Australians' opening match, they thrashed the Kiwis. So they made an imposing 173 for 9 in their first dig. Lots of the big names scored runs. Alyssa Healy, Meg Lanning, Elise Perry. Then they rolled the Kiwis for 76. They'll next play Bangladesh on Wednesday, but really it looks like, they're in prime position to defend their title.
Lots to cheer on. Hey, good on you, Tom. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard.
There's Tom Maddox, and here's the news, 5 o'clock.
Good afternoon, Adam Story with ABC News. An Indigenous water expert says the federal government's pledge to improve water quality in remote communities will be a complex and expensive challenge. The Albanese government's committed $150 million towards improving water quality in some First Nations communities under its Closing the Gap plan announced today. Indigenous Affairs Minister Linda Burney says contaminated water supplies have caused widespread renal failure in some communities. University of Canberra Associate Professor Brad Morridge says there are some big obstacles to overcome.
They don't have regular water testing, they don't have the right infrastructure, and then obviously combating the contamination of these waters is another challenge. So, there's some real issues there.
Investigations are underway into how a hazardous dust cloud formed at a chemical processing plant on the state's central coast this afternoon. Kira Proust reports.
The toxic dust cloud forced the evacuation of a chemical processing factory this afternoon at Wyong on the central coast north of Sydney. Around 50 workers were ordered off the site as fire crews worked to disperse the dust and render the area safe. Fire and Rescue New South Wales says the dust escaped from a blast furnace waste containment bin at a factory just after 12:30. Firefighters have established a decontamination area and all runoff has been contained on site. The clean-up is underway in consultation with the Environment Protection Authority, who will investigate how and why the incident occurred.
An inquiry into the convictions of Kathleen Folbig for killing her 4 children in the New South Wales Hunter has heard diary entries that were used to convict her are now considered to be the thoughts of a grieving mother. Here's court reporter Jamel Wells.
A second inquiry into Kathleen Folbig's convictions is underway after a petition from scientists about a recently discovered rare gene mutation that causes sudden death. Counsel assisting Sophie Callan said when Kathleen Folbig was convicted in 2003, the Crown characterised her diary entries about struggling with motherhood as admissions of guilt. But Ms Callan said a range of experts who've since analysed the diaries now believe the entries are not admissions of guilt, but a coping mechanism written by a mother struggling with grief.
A new gas-fired power plant in the Hunter region will open 6 months later than expected. The new Hunter Power project is being built by Snowy Hydro in Kurri Kurri and will provide 660 megawatts of power. It's being built partly to cover the loss of the nearby Liddell coal-fired power station, which is closing in April. Energy Department official Simon Duggan has told Senate estimates the gas plant won't open until May next year.
We have been advised by Snowy Hydro towards the end of last year that first power for that Hunter Power project had been delayed to May 2024, so from their previous estimate of December 2023.
Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen has ordered one of the handful of independent media broadcasters in the country to shut down. With the details, Southeast Asia correspondent Zoe Ford.
Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen revoked Voice of Democracy's licence to publish or broadcast and ordered police to keep order but not seize property. He claims the independent news organisation attacked him and his son and hurt the dignity and reputation of Cambodia. Last week, VOD published a story saying Hun Sen's son and commander of the army, Hun Manet, signed off on an earthquake aid package for Turkey. But Hun Sen claims the story misrepresented the facts and only the Prime Minister has the authority to make decisions on foreign aid. VOD says it was an unintentional mistake and has apologised.
The share market fell today after a mixed session on Wall Street at the weekend. The ASX 200 lost 0.2% to end on 7,417. The sectors are mixed, with energy stocks up 1.8% and consumer discretionaries down nearly 1.5%. The dollar's currently trading at 69.1 US cents. The Kansas City Chiefs have defeated the Philadelphia Eagles 38 points to 35 to win this year's Super Bowl in Arizona. The Chiefs completed a second-half comeback and were helped by a Super Bowl record 64-yard punt return against the Eagles special teams unit, which included Australian punter Aaron Sipos. Kansas City quarterback Patrick Mahomes overcame a second-quarter ankle injury to record 3 touchdown passes and win his second Super Bowl. To the weather for the state tomorrow, a few showers in the east, mostly about the ranges and coast. Afternoon thunderstorms possible about the central ranges, northeast and parts of the northern inland. Thunderstorms potentially severe about the northern ranges, slopes and the north coast. The chance of a shower in Sydney later tonight, then cloudy with a high chance of showers tomorrow and a top of 25. That's the latest from ABC News. It's now 5:05.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover
on ABC Radio Sydney.
Yeah, g'day, Rich Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Today, 20 years in prison, but experts are today lining up to say she's been unfairly found guilty. The Kathleen Folbig inquiry. Here's a new line of evidence. We'll hear from Jamelle Wells a little later. Also today, the health push focused on chronic disease. Peter Braden from Grattan will be here first up, and the Monday Political Forum at 5:30 with Zali Steggall, Susan Templeman and Catherine Greiner. It's all ahead here on ABC Radio Sydney, on radio at 7:02 a.m, on the ABC Listen app, on digital radio, on TV's Channel 25, and of course online everywhere. When did you change your mind about something significant? We've heard from listeners who changed their mind about the Vietnam War. They're in favour of it, then they weren't. Homophobia, things like gay marriage, they were against it, then they weren't. Indigenous rights. The person who was the bank worker who complained about the anti-Vietnam War protests stopping her getting home from work when she was about, I think she said 16 or 17. 2 years later, she wanted to join that same demonstration. When did you change your mind about something? This is interesting from Jess. Before I had kids, I would judge parents for their children's behaviour. I thought bad parenting was the reason for all ills, including fussy eating. Having had 2 children now, including one with a disability, I have completely changed my judgmental attitudes to parenting. That's from Jess. From Tom, against the trend, I changed my mind to become a Christian, and at 45, I'm so glad I did. No one has challenged me more to change than Jesus, who says, love your neighbour as yourself. Now there's a lifelong challenge. That's from Tom. And just in the topic of changing generally, Jeff says, as a young apprentice joiner, my very well-educated Austrian boss and master said, if you change your mind, it proves you have a mind to change. Never a truer word. What significant thing did you change your mind about? How do you look back on what you used to think? 1300 222 702. And on the text 0467 922 702. Just check the traffic quickly if you're battling around. Here is the latest on the roads.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Yeah, from Live Traffic New South Wales, we're told at Heathcote, Princes Highway, at Heathcote Road, a car breakdown has knocked out one northbound lane. It's lane 1. At Glenbrook, the Great Western Highway at Governor's Drive, a car breakdown there, westbound traffic affected. At Pennant Hills, Boundary Road approaching Pennant Hills Road, car breakdown with one eastbound lane closed. At Glenmore Park, Mulgoa Road at the M4 motorway, 2 cars involved in a crash there. They have cleared it, but still heavy traffic conditions westbound. And at Monterey, finally, the Grand Parade at President Avenue, a bus breakdown with one northbound lane closed. That one is in lane 2.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
Well, last November, the government announced it was setting up an Australian Centre for Disease Control to improve the country's preparedness for public health emergencies, and with a renewed focus on preventing chronic disease. Today, the Grattan Institute released a paper with suggestions for how this body can drive down rates of chronic disease, and why chronic disease it has such an unfair impact on different groups of people. It says also that chronic conditions are the biggest killer in this country, contributing to 9 in 10 deaths. Well, Peter Braden is the Program Director of Health and Aged Care at the Grattan Institute and joins us here on Drive. Peter, good afternoon.
Hi, Richard.
You argue in this paper that vested interests in this country are really putting a brake on change that we could otherwise achieve.
Yeah, that's right. We've seen that when government wants to make healthy choices easier for people to make, whether it's by setting standards for how much salt might be in food or taxing unhealthy sugar-sweetened beverages or even improving labelling so consumers can be better informed, we know that industries that stand to lose profits will activate and lobby governments. We know that they have meetings with ministers. We know they donate to political parties. And we've seen their input into the policy process before, where things like clear labelling about the health risks from food has been watered down, and industry has come in and proposed voluntary standards instead of mandatory standards, things like that. So that's one of the reasons we say this new Centre for Disease Control should be independent, so that it can put the other side of the story, make sure that the public is well informed about the benefits of taking action to prevent chronic disease.
The STAR system is a pretty good example where it sounds like a good idea, but the way it operates it means that a lot of very unhealthy food seems to get 4 or 5 stars.
Well, that's right. It's not as clear as it could be, and it also remains voluntary, and it's not applied to a lot of products. So certainly industries quite rightly have a lot of expertise. They should be consulted. They should have a say. But where vested interests are concerned, it's really good to have that independent voice as well. And another good reason that you need the strong, independent expert voice is prevention's kind of hard for governments to take action on because it's about future gains. The minister and the government may not be around in 5, 10, 20 years when a lot of the benefits play out. And just like in climate change and in setting interest rates, for those kind of areas, we have those independent voices to keep that focus on the future and push governments to do the right thing. And it'd be good to have something similar in health.
The burden of chronic disease falls so spectacularly unequally in this country. These are just a few of the things in your paper. Australians who lack formal education or with little formal education can expect to die about 8 years younger than their fellow citizens. People who live in rural Australia will die about 2 to 3 years earlier on average than people who live in cities.
Yeah, they're terrible statistics, aren't they? And these are the kind of big gaps in health and life expectancy that we pretty much just accept that are going to happen. But they, of course, represent a huge amount of suffering, and a lot of it's avoidable. So chronic disease is by far the biggest cause of illness and death in Australia. It's the biggest contribution to those gaps. But the good news is about 40% of that illness is preventable by reducing the risk factors like obesity, overweight, tobacco and alcohol. So if we cut those, if this new body does its job and if governments step up to put in the funding needed, it'll start to reduce those big gaps. And if we wait for the illnesses and the risk factors to build up, it's going to be too late to have fair health outcomes. It really has to start with more prevention.
It's true there are some chronic diseases which are not affected by lifestyle factors. You can't do anything about type 1 diabetes, for instance.
Yeah, great example. These kind of genetic conditions, you can't do something about it. But the big ones, a lot of the big ones can be reduced. So things like type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease. A lot of cancers are caused by dietary and environmental factors. So, yeah, there's some things we can't change, but there's a huge amount we can. The amount of chronic disease that is caused by risk factors that can be reduced, that can be modified, that accounts for well over $20 billion of health spending every year. So it just shows you how much can be changed.
Now, a lot of that in your paper is changed by taxes. Things like, for instance, a sugar tax. We've seen it in places like the UK. You say it can work and it really does change behaviour.
That's right. There's a range of things that governments can do. So one is they can regulate products to say, okay, let's have less salt in manufactured breads in supermarkets. They can provide information and campaigns, so the sort of slip, slop, slap, educate people about sun smart behaviour. They can do taxes, and they can also do programs in schools or communities to bring people together and try and change norms, change behaviours. So there's a whole range of things governments can do. And there's very strong evidence that, firstly, a lot of these things work. Secondly, that they're good value for the investment. And third, that we've fallen behind many other wealthy countries that have done more in a lot of these areas. You mentioned putting a tax on sugary drinks. That's been done in over 80 countries around the world, but not Australia. A similar number of countries have stronger policies than Australia to reduce the salt in manufactured foods. And that salt, we have about twice the amount we should on average in Australia. It leads to high blood pressure, it leads to stomach cancer. So there's a lot out there that has been proven to work, and this new body can really push governments to do more.
It is interesting that a lot of countries to whom we compare ourselves regularly, the UK is one example, do seem to have gone a bit further along this road than we have.
There's a couple of reasons. The first is we're one of very few countries in the world that don't have a Centre for Disease Control. So it's great that the government's setting one up. But the other thing that other countries do more than us is spend money on it. So we spend less than 2% of our health spending on prevention. That is well below the average among wealthy countries. It's down around half what the UK spends, around a third of what Canada spends. So we really need to increase that. Previous government policies have said, well, we should try and ramp that up towards 5%. So not only do we think the government should make sure this CDC is well-resourced, independent, with a big focus on preventing chronic disease, we also propose that they strike a national funding deal to increase that investment in prevention over time.
And well, I was going to say, don't take calls from the industry. You can take calls from the industry, but just don't do what they say all the time, right?
That's right. Yeah, look, I mean, like I say, they should have a voice, and everyone should in a democracy. But in these kind of areas where, vested interests might differ from the public interest and where the benefits come down the track rather than immediately, like I said, we've seen that good, strong, independent institutions can be, a constructive contributor to good policy when those kind of problems arise.
Yeah, nice to talk to you, Peter. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks very much.
It's Peter Braden, the Program Director of Health and Aged Care for the Grattan Institute, with some ideas about how the new Australian Centre for Disease Control should be set up and some of the priorities it should have. 1300 222 702 is the number on the text 0467 922 702. We're talking about those moments in life where you change your mind about something significant. It's a good thing to do, I think, to look at your views and to realise that they've changed. And to wonder, what it is, whether it's more information, more maturity, a different way of looking at the world. Tim says, for instance, having been anti-inheritance taxes, I now believe that we should be taxing people where it hurts the least, and that inherited wealth isn't great for society. He says, my daughter disagrees. But anyway, that's Tim. He's changed his mind about it. This is from Catherine. As a lesbian, I always supported marriage equality as a human right, but was absolutely sure I would never get married myself. Well, 6 months ago, I married my now wife, and I'm very, very, very glad I did. I feel safer and more secure as we age. I feel like we are sending a message to our community. And most importantly, I am totally and utterly in love. That's from Catherine on the text. She changed her mind. What did you change your mind about? David in Stanmore says, I supported the Republic as a youngster in the 1990s. Now I realise constitutional monarchy is a much better system than those professional politicians. That's from David in Stanmore. So when did you change your mind? What did you change your mind about? Paul is here on the line. Hi, Paul.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, good. What did you change your mind about?
Well, I got called up for national service and wasn't really keen on going, but I thought we're doing the right thing. I tried to get out, went to Vietnam, and 3 months into the tour, I realised we shouldn't be there. Was the Prime Minister at the time, Gorton, interfered with the running of the war, cost lives and that, and it was just a waste of time. So I just lost all interest.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of Australians changed their mind about this. A lot of Australians supported it at the beginning and then changed their mind. But of course, it's different if you're actually involved in it and you're there and your life's on the line.
Yeah, that's right. I thought it was complete waste of time, and the politicians lied to us, and now they're going to have a celebration for the end of it, not a celebration, a memorial.
Yeah. And how long did your tour last, Paul?
I was only there 11 and a half months.
Oh, only? God, yeah. Yeah, what agony, what agony. But yeah, and then but knowing in yourself that you shouldn't be there anyway. Hey, Paul, good on you. Thank you. Thanks for the call.
Okay.
Yeah, what did you change your mind about, and how do you look back to the decision you used to hold about that thing, whatever that thing was? 1300 222 702 is the number. Now, police are investigating the death of a man suspected to have overdosed at a Sydney music festival on Saturday. 6 men have been charged with drug supply offences, and an investigation is underway following this fatal drug overdose. It does sound as if there was quite a lot of drugs at the festival. Ruby Cornish is our ABC reporter. Good afternoon.
G'day, Richard.
Yeah, what do we know?
So this music festival is called Transmission Music Festival. A lot of electronic dance music. It was headlined by Armin van Buuren, who's very popular in the scene. About 18,000 people there. It was deemed a high-risk event, so there was a very heavy police presence. And it was a really hot day, so we had temperatures close to 37 degrees Celsius where the festival was. And as we know, with illicit substances, that's a recipe for disaster. So this death was
So mainly because people are drinking a lot of water because of that and the waters?
And I think these drugs just sort of impact your body's ability to self-regulate temperature.
Especially if it's under stress from the temperature.
That's right.
Okay.
And when you've got that heat, you've got really outdoor exposed areas. You have people who maybe have to line up to get water. So, people aren't hydrating properly. So we do tend to see more illness and more death when there are these hotter temperatures. So this death, he was a 26-year-old man and he'd been at the festival through Saturday and he presented to Bankstown Hospital at about 1:30 a.m. on Sunday morning, and by 3 a.m. he had died from what police are calling a suspected overdose. Now, they're investigating, they're preparing a report for the coroner, but there were plenty of other people at this festival who required medical attention, a dozen who had to be taken to hospital in ambulances, and 7 of those requiring intubation. So there may have been some bad drugs going around at this festival. We also had 130 people treated for issues related to drug use and heat exhaustion at the venue on the day.
And we know that there were, at least allegedly, people in possession of a lot of tablets. So a 23-year-old Oran Park man was charged with being found in possession of 253 ecstasy tablets, MDMA. A 21-year-old from Fairfield, 149 MDMA.
Yes, absolutely. There were 6 people in total charged with drug offences. Those were the people in possession of the highest number of MDMA tablets, and obviously they'll be going through the court systems now.
And there's a political side to this, of course, because there has been a debate for a long time in Sydney about drugs testing being available at festivals. It is in Canberra, for instance, a person who has some drugs can go up and without any sort of legal problem say, can you tell me what's in it? And the drug tester, the medical person can say, look, don't take that because it's actually, arsenic or whatever. Now, that's been a very contentious thing in Sydney, but the Greens, for instance, have said today that this yet again shows the need for that.
That's right. So we've had Greens MP Kate Fairman. She's the party's drug law reform spokesperson, basically renewing calls for pill testing at festivals. The argument from them is that the illegality encourages unsafe behaviour. So this idea that people are being afraid that they're going to get caught, so they take a large quantity of these drugs all in one go to avoid detection, and they don't necessarily know what's in those drugs. And we did have an inquest in 2019 into the deaths of 6 people at music festivals in New South Wales, and one of the recommendations that came out of that was to allow pill testing, but so far we haven't had action on that in New South Wales.
All right. Ruby, thank you very much. Ruby Cornish, our ABC reporter. It's currently 22 minutes past 5. Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio. 23 in the city, 23 in Camden, 23 in Gosford, 18 in Mount Boyce. If you're in Penrith, 24 in Cronulla, 22 degrees. Today, still a chance of showers tonight. Tomorrow, an 80% chance of showers, most likely in the morning and afternoon, with a minimum of 19 and a maximum of 25 degrees. Have the traffic and news headlines in a second. Then the Monday Political Forum. Catherine Greiner, Susan Templeman and Zali Steggall will be our guests this week. When have you changed your mind about something? There's been a discussion of Peter Dutton apologising today for not attending the apology to the Stolen Generations 15 years ago. Now, some people believe he's sincere, some people believe he's not, but it's still an apology. It's still a statement that I got it wrong. So when do you think you got it wrong? Elizabeth from Coogee is on the line. Hi, Elizabeth.
Oh, hi, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, what did we get wrong, do you think?
Well, I'm appalled to admit that I wasn't particularly supportive of Kathy Freeman when she flew the Aboriginal flag, when she won that amazing foot race.
Yes.
And it was interesting. I remember at the time within about, there was outrage. You probably remember it.
Yeah.
But I remember at the time Paul Keating stood up almost immediately and completely defended her right to do that and said he was proud. And I thought that was the moment where not only I think a lot of us realised, wow, why are we not supporting her?
Yeah.
But also I do think it was the time that he led the nation into, some people, into realising, we should be supporting that.
And we should be reaching out more generally. Yeah, I think it's so interesting, these moments that you change your mind. I think they're such a significant thing. And if you don't, as various people have been saying, if you don't change your mind, you've obviously not got a mind to change, because we're not born right about everything, are we?
No, and decent, good public dialogue is what leads us to change our mind the right way.
Yeah,
that's what we need in Australia.
That's an interesting point. Elizabeth from Coogee, thank you very much. When did you change your mind about something? This is amusing. Having grown up as a welded-on Beatles fan, I surprised myself when I played an Easy Beats anthology. I now believe that in the mid to late 60s, the Easy Beats were better musicians and wrote more sophisticated songs. Not long after that, of course, the Beatles blew everyone out of the water, but the Easy Beats, underrated. That's from Graham. I changed my mind about alcohol, says Jane. In my youth, I was a complete wowser. Now in my 60s, I love a glass of wine or two each evening. So who have we had? We've had lots of people change their mind about the Vietnam War, were supportive and then not supportive. Had quite a few people who say they were against that the marriage equality referendum and now see it quite differently, now supportive of it. We've seen a person who went from Christian to non-Christian, but another person went from non-Christian to Christian. So what did you change your mind about? Had a person who went from anti-nuclear to pro-nuclear. We had a person who went from wanting a republic to thinking the monarchy, not so bad after all. So it's not necessarily from conservative to progressive or right to left, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes it's the other way around. But the thing is, you've thought about it and you've changed. You weren't welded on to the previous view. 1300 222 702. What did you change your mind about? If you want to text 0467 922 702. Traffic in a tick, then the news headlines, and then Tom will be in with the weather.
Q&A has returned to Monday nights. It's the show that gives you a voice, challenges you and leaves you surprised.
You'll hear things you agree with.
Can't they see we deserve some justice?
Some things you don't.
If you back us into a corner, we're going to come out fighting.
But you're going to hear the truth, and someone has to answer.
Join Stan Grant for Q&A.
The answers are here.
Back on Monday nights on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
Subscribe to the ABC Radio Sydney e-newsletter today. You'll get exclusive content, the latest competitions, and program highlights delivered straight to your inbox. To subscribe, head to abc.net.au/Sydney.
Yeah, again, on the marriage equality, I remember thinking, this is from Mary, I remember thinking marriage should be between a man and a woman until we had the vote. I realised I believed strongly in equality. Therefore, I needed to vote yes to same-sex marriage. So, from Mary, so actually the process of, in that case, the vote made the difference. Dan says, I used to think Elvis was great, but I've since seen the light. So the opinions don't necessarily change for the better. Sometimes they go from sensible to madness, as in Dan's case. 1300 222 702. Oh, now I'm an adult. I've changed my mind about my parents being complete morons. Please don't tell my dad. I'd never hear the end of it. 5:28. On the text 0467 922 702. Or call us 1300 222 702. The traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
And Jeff Wallace is here from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Richard. M1 Barara. Looks like a truck's lost a bit of gravel heading north up towards the Hawkesbury. Between the Barara exit and the river, lanes 1 and 2, you might find a few loose stones. Also, Brighton Le Sands, broken down bus city-bound, the Grand Parade approaching President Avenue. Pennant Hills, a breakdown for Boundary Road, eastbound approaching Pennant Hills Road, and West Pennant Hills. Another breakdown, Castle Hill Road, westbound Kunara Avenue. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. Coming up, the Monday Political Forum, Catherine Greiner, Susan Templeman and Zali Stegel. Let's find out first what's on tonight's edition of PM.
David Lipson here on PM at 6:30. We go to the Northern Territory where residents near the big manganese mine on Groote Island are pushing for government air quality studies after satellite monitoring sparked concerns about fine particles. Also, the plan to block cyber criminals from sending official-looking text messages that are fleecing Australians of millions. Will it work?
It was the fact that it looked like a legitimate message from the bank, and I've ended up losing close to $25,000. I went into kind of a state of panic afterwards.
Also, another object shot down over Canada on PM tonight.
Some news headlines. Adam Story, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Richard. The federal opposition leader Peter Dutton has told federal parliament he regrets not attending the apology to the stolen generations. Today marks 15 years since the then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd made the apology, acknowledging successive governments had failed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians. A toxic dust cloud has forced the evacuation of a factory on the Central Coast. Fire and Rescue New South Wales says the dust escaped from a blast furnace waste containment bin at a factory in Wyong just after 12:30, forcing 50 workers out of the area. A new report has found casual and contract workers in the NDIS are leaving their jobs in larger numbers than in any other sector. The Australian Services Union, which commissioned the report, is urging the federal government to offer extra leave for all staff working in the disability sector.